Welcome to the Real Estate Espresso Podcast, your morning shot of what's new in the world of real estate investing. I'm your host, Victor Menashe. Today's another AMA episode. That is, Ask Me Anything. If you have a question that you think is going to be of broad interest, send it in. I'd love to answer your questions. Send your questions to victor@victorjm.com and I'll answer it live on the air. That's victor@victorjm.com. Today's question comes from Hayden in Atlanta. I received an appraisal which, in my opinion, doesn't reflect an accurate picture of the property value. The comparable properties listed in the report include agricultural land with zero entitlements versus my property, which is zoned for development. It's fully paved and has 46,000 square feet of buildings on it. The appraiser ultimately ignored the comparable properties and used the income multiple approach, but the cap rate he chose was a national average which doesn't reflect the local market conditions in South Florida. I understand that the appraisal process has to be independent so the bank can have an objective view of valuation. But this one's out to lunch. What do you recommend? Well, Hayden, this is an awesome question. Unfortunately, this type of situation is far more common than you might think. Now, fortunately, the errors sound pretty grave. The most difficult situation to correct is the appraisal that's only a few percentage points off. This one sounds like it's way off. You're completely correct in saying that the appraisal has to be independent and you can't be seen as directing or otherwise tainting the appraisal process. You want to keep the communication to the appraiser through the lender, and under no circumstances should you communicate directly with the appraiser. If you can get a hold of a market study for your submarket, you may be able to ask the lender to direct the appraiser to narrow the radius and use local data, not national averages, which are frankly not meaningful. A third-party market study should align with the appraisal quite closely, and if it doesn't, that's a problem. By showing the lender that the market study and the appraisal are far apart, you can likely convince the lender that there's a problem with the appraisal. The lender can then have a dialogue with the appraiser, but you can't. It shouldn't be too difficult to provide data to the lender for better land comps. I don't know for a fact, but I suspect that the appraiser was being lazy. Often, appraisers look at sales that were listed on the MLS since they're the easiest ones to find. If a transaction happens off-market, as many commercial transactions do, they will often overlook these because they're simply hard to find. If you work with a good commercial broker who knows the local market and the asset class, they may be able to point you towards better comparable sales. You could provide these to the lender, who will in turn ask the appraiser to consider these comps in their analysis. If you're wondering how to find these properties yourself, look at properties that have been recently built, or those that have received zoning approval from the city very recently. You'll probably find a recent land transaction in the property history. And finally, you can research who are the best commercial appraisers in the submarket and provide a list of 3 of them to the bank, asking them to choose a new appraiser. This requires paying for a new appraisal, and it could possibly delay the closing date. If you need to delay the closing, you can often negotiate an extension with the seller by offering them an increase in the earnest money deposit, along with a daily interest charge for every day that the closing is delayed beyond the original closing date. And the purpose of the daily interest is to cover the holding costs to the seller so they don't incur any losses as a result of the delay. Shows the seller that you're serious about closing, and you should let them know that the cause of the delay was out of your hands. These types of situations are incredibly common, and they've got to be handled delicately. A bad appraisal can taint a loan approval. I've had situations in the past when a bad appraisal meant abandoning a lender altogether and starting fresh with a new lender, getting a new approval from a brand new lender, and a completely new appraisal. Those situations, the delay can be considerable. I think back to a situation I had in 2012 when lending was very tight, banks were being conservative, and so were the appraisers. At that time, we went through the loan approval process with 3 separate lenders before we finally got a lender and an appraiser to agree on the valuation for a refinance. The entire process took 9 months from start to finish. Now, I'm not expecting that your situation is going to take anywhere near that long or be that difficult, but you never know. I want to thank you, Hayden, for an awesome question. It is a difficult situation when you're in it, but when you approach it in a professional way and simply arm the lender with the right data, you'll often come out of it on the other side with a good result. Have an awesome rest of your day. Go make some great things happen. I'll talk to you again tomorrow.